My name is Leo Vance, and for as long as I can remember, my hands have been my voice. They speak in the language of wood, in the patient sanding of a weathered tabletop, the precise joinery of a chair meant to last for generations, the gentle coaxing of a warped floorboard back into place. My workshop, a converted barn behind our small house on the marshy outskirts of Port Blossom, is my sanctuary. It smells of cedar, of linseed oil, and of the salty air that drifts in from the tidal creeks. It is a place of creation and restoration, a world away from the one my wife, Helen, had grown to inhabit. For 20 years, our worlds had managed to coexist, spinning on separate but connected axes. I was the steady, grounding force. She was the ambitious comet, forever chasing a brighter, more brilliant sky. When we met, she'd loved the calluses on my hands, calling them proof of an honest life. She'd sit in my workshop for hours, watching me work, her laughter echoing off the high, dusty rafters. We bought this house, a forgotten little cottage that had belonged to my grandparents, and I poured my soul into its revival. I replaced the sagging porch, refinished the heart pine floors by hand, and built the bookshelves where our daughter, Maya, would one day stack her favorite stories. I supported Helen through her real estate courses, working 2 jobs so she could focus on her studies. When her parents' hardware business faltered and they faced foreclosure, it was my savings, the money I'd painstakingly set aside from furniture commissions, that saved their home. I was the reliable brother-in-law, the one who fixed leaky faucets for her sister, Diana, the one who drove her mother to doctor's appointments when everyone else was swamped. I was family. Or so I believed. But over the years, something had shifted. Helen's success as a high-end real estate agent in Port Blossom's historic district had changed her. The scent of sawdust on my clothes, once a charming perfume, became an embarrassment. My simple, durable work boots were an eyesore next to her designer heels. Our quiet life on the marsh felt provincial to her, a stark contrast to the glittering galas and exclusive charity auctions she now frequented. The chasm between us grew slowly, silently, a hairline crack that eventually spiderwebbed into a deep, unbridgeable canyon. Maya, our 15-year-old daughter, was my anchor in this shifting landscape. She had my quiet nature and my love for things made with care. Her sketchbook was a constant companion, her charcoal-smudged fingers a mirror of my own sawdust-dusted hands. She understood the language of my workshop. She saw the beauty in a piece of reclaimed cypress, the history in the grain of a century-old beam. She was the one pure, uncomplicated joy in a life that had become increasingly complex. The breaking point, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion but a quiet, clinical severance. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, delivered by Helen with the same detached professionalism she used to close a deal on a multi-million-dollar waterfront property. I was in the kitchen, wiping with glue from my hands, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. Maya was at the table, sketching the egrets that stalked the marsh outside our window. Helen walked in, her phone pressed to her ear, a strained, polite smile on her face. She was dressed in a crisp, cream-colored pantsuit, looking as if she'd stepped out of a magazine. "Of course, Diana, I completely understand," she said into the phone, her voice smooth as polished marble. No, it makes perfect sense. The aesthetic is crucial." She paused, her eyes flicking over to me for a brief, unreadable moment. "Yes, I'll handle it. Talk soon." She ended the call and placed her phone on the granite countertop with a soft click. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. Maya looked up from her drawing, her brow furrowed. "Is everything okay with Aunt Diana's wedding?" Helen took a slow breath, composing herself. "Everything is fine, sweetie. It's just logistics." She turned to me, her expression unyielding. "Leo, we need to talk." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I'd learned to brace myself for these talks. They usually preceded a request for me to make myself scarce during one of her networking dinners or a critique of the old, reliable truck I drove. "Diana's fiancé, as you know, comes from a very prominent family," she began, her tone measured. "The Wellingtons are basically Port Blossom royalty. Doctors, judges, old money. The wedding is going to be a major social event. It's being covered by Southern Tides magazine." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was heading, but feeling a familiar cold dread creep into my stomach. "Okay. They've been very particular about the guest list," she continued, avoiding my gaze. "They're curating a certain atmosphere. It's about creating a seamless, elegant experience for their guests." The euphemisms were suffocating. I decided to cut through them. "What are you trying to say, Helen?" She finally looked at me, her eyes devoid of the warmth I once knew. Diana and Charles feel that, well, they've decided to keep the invitations limited to a certain circle. To their peers. She hesitated, then delivered the final, clean cut. They're worried you and Maya might feel out of place. So, they've asked that you not attend. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp as shattered glass. I felt the blood drain from my face. I glanced at Maya. Her pencil had stilled. Her head was bent low over her sketchbook, but I saw her shoulders tense. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her. Out of place. I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. I wasn't just her brother-in-law. I had helped raise Diana after her father had his first heart attack. I'd taught her how to drive. Maya was her only niece. Leo, don't make this difficult, Helen said, her voice taking on a harder edge. You work with your hands. You wear work boots. Your world is different. They're having a black tie affair at the Ocean Course Clubhouse. It's for the city's elite. It's not a personal judgment, it's about maintaining an image. A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. Not personal? They had judged my entire existence, my profession, my lifestyle, my very character, and deemed it unworthy. They had taken my daughter, a bright, sensitive girl who had done nothing but love them, and branded her as an undesirable. Maya lifted her head, her large, dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears. They weren't asking for an explanation, they were pleading. Pleading for me to fix this, to deny it, to make it untrue. So, we're not invited, she asked, her voice small and fragile. Because we're not elite? The words sounded absurd and cruel coming from her lips. Helen's face softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at her daughter, a flicker of maternal instinct warring with her social ambition. But the ambition won. It's not about being good enough, Maya, she said, the excuse sounding hollow even to her own ears. It's just a different kind of party. You wouldn't enjoy it anyway. That was the deepest cut of all. The casual dismissal of her feelings, the assumption that she couldn't possibly comprehend their rarefied world of champagne towers and empty pleasantries. I looked from my heartbroken daughter to my stranger of a wife. I saw the 20 years of our life together laid bare, and I finally understood. I had never been a partner in her ascent. I was the ballast she was now ready to cut loose. All the years of my support, my labor, my love, they weren't deposits in a shared emotional bank. They were stepping stones she had used and was now ready to leave behind, submerged in the rising tide of her new life. A storm of anger and grief raged inside me, but I held it back. Arguing would be pointless. Yelling would only validate their caricature of me as a rough, uncultured man. It would give them the drama they secretly craved. And more importantly, it would frighten Maya. So I took a deep, steadying breath, drawing on the same patience I used to plane a difficult piece of wood. I met Helen's gaze, my own clear and calm. Understood, I said, my voice even. We won't be attending. Helen seemed surprised by my lack of protest, then visibly relieved. Thank you for being reasonable about this, Leo. She glanced at her watch. I have to get to a showing. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the floor I had laid myself, leaving behind a silence that was louder than any argument could ever be. I watched her go, and in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It settled. It hardened into a quiet, unshakable resolve. I turned back to Maya. A single tear had escaped and was tracing a path down her cheek, smudging a faint charcoal line. I walked over and knelt beside her, gently taking the pencil from her hand. Hey, I said softly. Look at me. She slowly lifted her eyes to meet mine. Their opinion does not define you, I told her, my voice thick with an emotion I refused to name. It does not define me. It says nothing about us and everything about them. Do you understand? She nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. We are not less, Maya, I continued, wiping her tear with my thumb. We are more. We have heart. We have integrity. And we have this. I gestured around the warm, sunlit kitchen, at the sturdy walls of the house, at the wild, beautiful marsh beyond the window. This is real. What they're chasing, that's a ghost. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her tight, the rough fabric of my work shirt absorbing her silent tears. As I stared out at the timeless rhythm of the tide, I knew this wasn't an end. It was a beginning. I would not let them diminish us. I would not let their shallow world cast a shadow on my daughter's spirit. I would fix this. Not with anger, but with the same quiet, methodical precision I used to restore broken things. And I would build us a future on a foundation so solid, their flimsy world of image and illusion would crumble at its sight. The weeks that followed the wedding snub were a study in quiet detachment. A fragile truce held our home together, thin as veneer. Helen moved through the house like a ghost, her conversations with me brief and transactional, focused on bills and schedules. She was consumed by the wedding preparations, a whirlwind of fabric swatches, seating charts, and breathless phone calls with Diana. She spoke of the Wellingtons with a reverence once reserved for saints, their name a password to a kingdom she was desperate to enter. I retreated to my workshop, seeking solace in the familiar scent of wood and the honest labor of my hands. I was working on a large commission, a set of custom library shelves for an elderly professor who lived on one of the remote sea islands. The wood was reclaimed longleaf pine, salvaged from a dismantled 19th century rice mill. It was dense, heavy, and rich with history, its tight grain telling a story of resilience. As I worked the wood, planing away the rough, weathered exterior to reveal the golden heart within, I felt a kinship with it. I, too, was being stripped of a false exterior, my true character being revealed. Maya was my silent shadow during those days. She'd bring her sketchbook to the workshop after school, sitting on a tall stool in the corner, the only sounds the scratch of her charcoal on paper and the rhythmic scrape of my tools. We didn't talk much about the wedding. We didn't have to. The unspoken hurt was a living presence between us. I saw the sting of the rejection play out in small, painful ways. Her friends, their social media feeds flooded with chatter about the upcoming wedding of the year, would ask if she was excited. I heard her once, through the open workshop door, telling her best friend, Chloe, that we had a family thing that weekend. The lie was a small, sharp stone in my shoe for the rest of the day. The wedding day arrived, a perfect, crisp autumn Saturday. Helen left early in the morning, a cloud of expensive perfume and nervous energy. She was wearing a shimmering silver dress that cost more than my truck's engine. She paused at the door, a moment of hesitation in her eyes. "Are you sure you're both going to be okay?" she asked, the question feeling more like a formality to assuage her own guilt than a genuine concern. "We'll be fine, Helen," I said, not looking up from the coffee I was pouring. "Have a good time." After she left, Maya and I took my old boat out into the maze of tidal creeks behind the house. We didn't talk. We just listened to the cry of the gulls and the gentle lapping of the water against the hull. We watched a pod of dolphins break the surface, their sleek, gray bodies arcing through the water with effortless grace. In the quiet immensity of the marsh, the petty concerns of Port Blossom's elite felt distant and insignificant. We were restoring ourselves, finding our balance in the natural world that had always sustained us. That night, the internet provided a window into the world from which we'd been barred. Diana, a budding lifestyle curator, had hired a social media team to document the event. The photos were a perfect tableau of curated opulence, champagne flutes held by manicured hands, extravagant floral arrangements, a string quartet playing on a lantern-lit lawn overlooking the ocean. There was Helen, beaming, standing between a stern-looking man I presumed was Dr. Wellington and a woman dripping in diamonds. She looked happy, radiant. She looked like she belonged. There was another photo, a candid shot of Diana and Helen, their heads close together, laughing. The caption, written by Diana, read, "My amazing sister, my rock. So grateful for the family that truly gets it." That little phrase, "the family that truly gets it," was a deliberate, calculated barb. It wasn't just an exclusion, it was a redefinition of family itself. We weren't just uninvited, we were erased. I closed the laptop. The anger I felt was cold and clear, like ice. It wasn't a hot, blinding rage, but a chilling clarity. The illusion of our shared life had finally, irrevocably shattered. My quiet change began the following Monday. It wasn't born of a sudden impulse, but of a slow, dawning realization that I needed to build a fortress, not of walls, but of self-respect. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to the professor for whom I was building the library. I finished the installation that week, and he was so moved by the craftsmanship that he paid me a handsome bonus and, more importantly, referred me to two of his influential, history-loving friends. My waiting list for commissions, already long, doubled overnight. I worked tirelessly, channeling my grief and anger into the wood, my hands finding a purpose that my heart had lost. The work grounded me, and the financial security it brought was a tool, a means to an end. My second step was a visit to an old friend, a quiet, unassuming man named Samuel who happened to be one of the sharpest estate lawyers in Port Blossom. We met for coffee at a small cafe far from the polished marble lobbies of the downtown law firms. "Leo," he said, after I'd laid out the whole story, his kind eyes full of concern. "This is about more than a wedding invitation." "I know," I said. "This is about protecting Maya. It's about protecting my own sanity." We talked for 2 hours. I told him about the house, how it had been my grandparents', how Helen's name was on the deed alongside mine. And then I remembered something. Years ago, when we had refinanced to pay off her parents' mortgage, the bank had recommended a quitclaim deed to streamline things in the event of my death, ensuring the property passed to her without probate. We had both signed it in front of a notary. She had barely glanced at it, dismissing it as boring legal stuff that was my domain. But the document was never filed with the county. It was sitting in my old roll-top desk, a forgotten piece of paper that had suddenly become the key to my future. Samuel's eyebrows shot up. "Leo, if you have a signed and notarized quitclaim from her, and you file it, the house becomes yours alone. It's perfectly legal." She signed over her interest in the property. I felt a tremor of something, fear, power, righteousness, run through me. "I don't want to be a monster, Sam. I just want to be safe." "Being safe isn't monstrous," he replied gently. "It's necessary. You're not taking something from her, you're reclaiming what was always spiritually yours, what you've poured your life and labor into. You're drawing a boundary." That word, boundary, resonated deep within me. For 20 years, my boundaries had been soft, permeable, easily crossed by the needs and demands of others. It was time to build a wall. Not of spite, but of steel. I left Samuel's office with a clear plan. I filed the quitclaim deed. The process was quiet, administrative, a simple matter of paperwork. But it felt monumental, like the shifting of tectonic plates beneath my life. The house, my sanctuary, my ancestral home, was now legally and rightfully mine and mine alone. As the holidays approached, the final piece of my plan began to take shape. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year. I loved the quiet magic of it, the focus on warmth and togetherness. For years, I had hosted Christmas Eve at our house, a tradition Helen had gradually phased out in favor of more sophisticated gatherings at country clubs or her sister's home. This year, I decided we would reclaim it. I designed the invitations myself. I used thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind with a soft, deckled edge. On the front, I printed a small, elegant woodcut of a lone egret standing in the marsh, an image Maya had sketched. The message inside was simple, the words chosen with the precision of a master craftsman. "You are warmly invited to a celebration of hearth and heart, hosted by Leo and Maya Vance. On Christmas Eve at 7 o'clock in the evening. Join us for a night of simple food, warm company, and genuine gratitude. Dress is whatever makes you feel comfortable and true. For in this home, character is the only currency that matters." I didn't just send them to our small circle of friends. With the help of the professor and his network, I procured a copy of the guest list from Diana's wedding. I addressed an invitation to every single one of them. The Wellingtons, their doctor and judge friends, the lifestyle columnists, the corporate executives. I sent them to their homes, their offices, their private clubs. It wasn't an act of aggression. It was a statement of values. I was holding up a mirror, inviting them to see a reflection of a world they had chosen to ignore. I didn't expect them to come. I just wanted them to receive the invitation. I wanted them to read the words and feel, for just a moment, the quiet power of a world that did not require their validation. The final, painful step came on December 20th. I spent the day carefully packing Helen's belongings, her designer clothes, her expensive shoes, her networking books and business awards. I placed them in neat, labeled boxes in the guest room. On top of the boxes, I laid 2 documents, a copy of the newly filed deed for the house and the divorce papers Samuel had prepared. She came home late, flushed with success from a holiday party at her firm. She swept into the kitchen, dropping her keys on the counter. "God, what a night. You wouldn't believe who I talked to. Richard Wellington himself said my name, is the one he passes along for luxury properties now." She was glowing, alive with the thrill of her victory. I felt nothing but a profound, aching sadness for the woman she had become. "Helen," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk." My tone stopped her cold. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in weeks. "What is it?" "Leo, you're scaring me." "Your things are in the guest room," I said quietly. "There are some documents there for you to look at." Her face paled. She walked, almost in a daze, to the guest room. I heard the rustle of papers, a sharp intake of breath, and then a strangled cry. No. What is this? What have you done? She stormed back into the kitchen, the papers clutched in her hand, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. The house? How could you take the house from me? I didn't take it, Helen, I replied, my voice as calm as the still water of the marsh at dawn. I reclaimed it. You signed it over to me years ago. You just didn't care enough to read what you were signing. I paused, letting the weight of her own negligence settle upon her. This was never a partnership to you. It was a platform. And you've made it clear that I am no longer a part of the image you want to project. So I am respectfully stepping off the stage. This is revenge, she hissed, her eyes wild. This is because of the wedding. No, I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. This is not about the wedding. The wedding was just the symptom. This is about the disease. This is about a profound lack of respect. Not just for me, but for our daughter. You chose a guest list over your own child, Helen. You chose a photograph over your family. That is a choice I can no longer live with. She stared at me, speechless, the color draining from her face as the reality of her situation began to dawn on her. The beautiful house, the stable foundation she had taken for granted, was gone. And in its place was the cold, hard truth of her own choices. You can stay in the guest room until you've made arrangements, I said, my voice gentle but firm. But this is my home now. And on Christmas Eve, Maya and I are going to fill it with people who value heart over status. I turned and walked back to my workshop, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen, a stranger in the house I had built for us. The scent of cedar welcomed me like an old friend. I picked up a piece of sandpaper and a half-finished chair leg, and I began to work, my hands finding their rhythm, my heart finding its peace. The quiet change was complete. The storm was about to break. Christmas Eve arrived not with a blanket of snow, as it does in storybooks, but with the soft, pearlescent haze of a coastal winter. The air was cool and smelled of salt and damp earth. Inside our home, a fire crackled in the hearth I'd rebuilt with river stones, casting a warm, flickering glow on the faces of our guests. Our party was nothing like the galas Helen and Diana favored. There were no cater waiters with silver trays, no string quartets. Instead, the long wooden dining table I'd built years ago was laden with food brought by our friends, a hearty fish stew from my neighbor who ran a charter boat, a rustic apple pie from Maya's art teacher, warm bread from the old Portuguese woman who owned the corner bakery. The guests were a tapestry of our real life, Samuel the lawyer, his wife and kids, the elderly professor and his wife, the families of Maya's friends, a few of my most cherished clients. They wore sweaters and comfortable shoes. Their laughter was loud and genuine. Maya was radiant. She moved through the small crowd with a newfound confidence, her shyness replaced by a quiet grace. She wore a simple dark green velvet dress, and her face was lit from within. Seeing her like that, happy and whole in a space filled with authentic affection, was the only gift I needed. Around 8 o'clock, as the party was in full swing, the first car arrived. It was a sleek, black German sedan, its headlights cutting through the marsh mist. It pulled up to the end of our long, gravel driveway, where I'd hired a discreet security guard for the evening, a retired police officer named Frank, whose back deck I'd rebuilt last summer. More cars followed, a pristine Range Rover, a vintage Mercedes, a gleaming Cadillac Escalade. They formed a silent, glittering procession at the edge of our property, their occupants no doubt bewildered by the rustic lane and the modest, light-filled cottage at its end. This was not the grand estate they were accustomed to. Helen had left 2 days prior, moving in with her sister Diana until this whole mess is sorted out. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they would come. Their pride and their curiosity would not allow them to stay away. The invitation, with its gentle but pointed message, was a challenge they couldn't ignore. They had to see what world I could possibly have that would dare to exclude them. Inside, we heard nothing. The sound of our friends' laughter and the soulful music from an old blues record drowned out the world outside. But Frank, my guard, kept me updated with quiet texts. Frank, they're here. Looks like the whole clan. About 5 cars. Me, as we discussed, Frank. Be polite but firm. Frank, you got it, Leo. Merry Christmas. Outside, in the damp chill, a scene was unfolding. Helen, Diana, her new husband Charles Wellington, and their respective parents stepped out of their vehicles. They were dressed to the nines, the men in tailored coats, the women in cashmere and heels that were wholly unsuited for a gravel drive. They approached Frank, who stood calmly at the entrance to our property, a sturdy, impassive gatekeeper. "We're here for the Vance party," Diana announced, her voice carrying an unmistakable note of condescending authority. Frank consulted his small list on a clipboard, a prop we'd devised for effect. He looked up, his expression neutral. "I'm sorry, but your names are not on the guest list." A wave of disbelief washed over their faces. "There must be some mistake," Helen's mother, Eleanor, said, clutching her purse. "We're family. Leo is my son-in-law." "My instructions are very clear," Frank said, his voice polite but unyielding. "The hosts have requested a private, intimate gathering this evening. I'm sorry for any inconvenience." "This is ridiculous." Diana's new father-in-law, the formidable Dr. Wellington, boomed. "We received an invitation." He brandished the cream-colored card as if it were a court summons. Frank nodded. "Yes, sir. I believe the hosts wanted to ensure you received their holiday message." He then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. He handed it to Diana. "They also asked me to give you this." Inside was another piece of the same cardstock, on which I had written a simple, final message. Maya and I had crafted it together the night before, choosing each word with care. It read, "A home is built not with money or status, but with love, trust, and mutual respect. Since you have shown you possess none of the latter, you are no longer welcome in the former. Tonight is a celebration for those who understand that family is a bond of the heart, not a strategic alliance. We wish you a Merry Christmas and hope the coming year brings you the one thing you seem to lack, perspective." The silence that followed was, as Frank later described it to me, absolute. Diana's face went white with rage. Helen looked as if she'd been struck. Her father, a man I'd always found to be the most reasonable of the bunch, simply looked down at the gravel, his shoulders slumped in defeat. It was Eleanor, Helen's mother, who finally broke the spell. Her voice, shrill and trembling with fury, cut through the quiet night. "How dare he? After everything we've done for him. Who does he think he is?" What they failed to notice was that they were no longer alone. One of the other guests from the wedding list, a young tech entrepreneur known for his prolific social media presence, had also driven out, intrigued by the mysterious invitation. He'd arrived just in time to see the family being turned away and, smelling a story, had discreetly started a live video on his phone. He captured it all: the family's stunned disbelief, Dr. Wellington's blustering indignation, and Eleanor's final, desperate cry as Frank politely but firmly asked them to return to their vehicles. "Do you have any idea who we are?" she shrieked, a perfect cliché of entitled arrogance. The internet, as it turns out, loves a cliché, especially when it's served with a side of comeuppance. By the time our last guest had departed, leaving our little house filled with the warm, lingering scent of pine and cinnamon, the video was already beginning to trend in Port Blossom's social circles. The clip was short, devastating, and perfectly titled by its creator, "Port Blossom Elites Get a Lesson in Class on Christmas Eve." I sat by the dying fire, a cup of tea warming my hands, the house quiet except for the soft breathing of Maya, who had fallen asleep on the sofa, her sketchbook open on her lap. I felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. It was the feeling of a house being set right, of a life being reclaimed. I had not destroyed anything. I had simply protected what was precious. I had chosen the warmth of my own hearth over the cold glitter of their world. I had chosen my daughter. And that, I knew, was a choice that would echo far beyond this one quiet Christmas night. The echoes began on Christmas morning. They started as ripples on social media and quickly swelled into a tidal wave. The entrepreneur's live video had been screen-recorded and shared hundreds of times. By noon, it was the top trending topic on the local news aggregator site, accompanied by a slew of anonymous but well-informed comments. "I catered that wedding," one comment read. "The bride's sister, the one in the video, made the staff use a separate entrance because she didn't want them seen by the guests. This is 100% on brand for them." Another wrote, "I work at Beaumont Realty with Helen Vance, the woman in the gray coat. She refers to clients from less affluent neighborhoods as charity cases. Karma is beautiful." The story had all the elements of a modern-day fable: the humble, hard-working craftsman, the innocent daughter, the snobbish, social climbing in-laws, and a perfectly executed, dignified act of self-respect. People weren't just laughing at the Vances and the Wellingtons, they were cheering for me. For Maya and me, Christmas Day was an island of peace in the center of this burgeoning storm. We exchanged simple gifts. She gave me a framed charcoal portrait of my hands at work, her artist's eye capturing every line, callous and vein with astonishing detail and love. I gave her a set of professional-grade watercolors and a beautiful, leather-bound journal. For all the stories you're going to tell, I said. We spent the day walking on a deserted stretch of beach, the winter sun pale and low in the sky. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, but I ignored it. This day was for us. The consequences for Helen's family, however, were immediate and brutal. Diana, who had carefully curated an online persona as a graceful arbiter of Southern charm and hospitality, saw her world crumble in a matter of hours. The lifestyle brands she partnered with, companies that sold an image of authenticity and down-to-earth luxury, began to distance themselves. A lucrative sponsorship deal with a high-end cookware company was indefinitely paused. Her comment sections, once filled with fawning adoration, became a torrent of mockery and condemnation. Her meticulously constructed brand was shattered, revealed as a hollow facade. Helen's fallout was quieter, but no less devastating. The managing partner at Beaumont Realty, a shrewd, image-conscious woman, called her on the 26th and informed her that, given the reputational damage from the viral video, she was being placed on indefinite, unpaid leave. The world she had worked so hard to impress had turned on her in an instant. The most surprising call came a week later. It was from Arthur, my father-in-law. His voice on the phone was thin and reedy, stripped of its usual bluster. "Leo," he began, his voice cracking. I'm calling to apologize." I remained silent, letting him struggle with the words. "We were wrong," he said, the admission sounding painful and foreign on his tongue. "Arrogant. Cruel. What we did to you, and to that sweet girl, there's no excuse for it." He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "This thing, it's out of control, Leo. Diana is a wreck. Helen lost her job. The Wellingtons are furious, blaming us for the public embarrassment. It's all falling apart." His plea was unmistakable, woven between the lines of his confession. He wasn't just apologizing, he was asking for help. He was asking me, the family fixer, to mend what they had so thoroughly broken. I thought of the years I had spent patching their lives, fixing their plumbing, their finances, their petty squabbles. I had been their safety net, the one they could always count on to clean up their messes. "Arthur," I said, my voice calm and devoid of malice. "You cannot shatter a mirror and then ask the broken pieces to reflect you favorably again." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "So that's it, then?" he whispered. "You're just going to watch us burn?" "No," I replied. "I'm not watching at all. I'm looking forward at the life I'm building with my daughter. You all made it very clear that we are not part of your family. I am simply honoring your decision." I ended the call, my hands steady. There was no triumph in it, only a deep, somber sense of finality. A door had been closed, a lock had been turned, and I was finally on the right side of it. The true turning point, however, came not from a phone call or a news article, but from Maya herself. About 2 weeks into the new year, she came to me in the workshop, holding a sealed envelope. Her expression was serious, her young face set with a resolve that made her look years older. "I wrote a letter," she said, her voice clear and strong. "To Aunt Diana. I need to send it." My first instinct was to protect her, to tell her to let it go. But then I saw the look in her eyes. This wasn't about lashing out. This was about finding her own voice. "Can I read it?" I asked gently. She nodded and handed me the unsealed letter. My eyes scanned the page, her neat, careful handwriting filling the stark white paper. "Dear Aunt Diana. For a long time, I thought there was something wrong with us. When Mom told us we weren't invited to your wedding, I thought it was because my dad wears work boots and I'd rather draw in my sketchbook than go to a fancy party. I thought we weren't good enough for you. But I've had a lot of time to think, and I realize now that I was wrong. There's nothing wrong with us. There is something deeply, terribly wrong with a world where a person's worth is measured by their job title or the brand of their clothes. My dad is a craftsman. He creates beautiful, strong things from forgotten pieces of wood. He built the home you used to visit. He fixed your leaky sink more times than I can count. He did it because he believed you were family. He is the most honorable, decent, and kind man I know. The fact that you see his goodness as a liability says nothing about him and everything about you. I don't feel sorry for myself anymore. I feel sorry for you. You are surrounded by glittering, expensive things, but your life seems so poor. You traded authenticity for image and love for status. I hope one day you find something real. You don't need to worry about us feeling out of place at your parties anymore. We have found our place. It's in our home, with people who love us for who we are, not what they want us to be. Sincerely, Maya. Tears pricked my eyes as I finished reading. The letter was a masterpiece of quiet dignity. It was not an attack, but a declaration of independence. She hadn't just healed, she had grown into a person of profound strength and character. "It's perfect, Maya," I whispered, my voice thick with pride. "Absolutely perfect." She mailed the letter that afternoon. We never received a reply. But a few days later, we heard through the Port Blossom grapevine that Diana's new husband, Charles Wellington, had filed for an annulment. The official reason cited was fraud, with rumors swirling that Diana had grossly misrepresented her financial situation and the stability of her lifestyle brand. The public humiliation, it seemed, was a crack that had revealed a much deeper foundation of lies. The Wellington family, obsessed with image above all else, was severing ties to protect their own. One evening, a few weeks later, there was a knock on the door. It was Helen. She looked haggard, a shadow of the polished, confident woman she had been. Her expensive coat was rumpled, her eyes red and swollen. "Leo," she said, her voice raspy. "Please, can I come in?" I stepped aside but remained standing, a silent sentinel in my own home. She walked into the living room, her eyes darting around at the familiar space as if seeing it for the first time. "They're all gone," she whispered, sinking onto the edge of the armchair. "My clients, my friends. Diana won't even speak to me. She blames me. She says I should have been able to control you." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "As if anyone could ever control you." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Leo, you have to help me. You have to make a statement. Tell the press it was all a misunderstanding. A family spat that got out of hand. You're the hero in this story. They'll listen to you. Please. I'm losing everything." I looked at the woman before me, this stranger who wore my wife's face, and I felt not anger, but a vast, empty pity. She still didn't understand. She thought this was a game of public relations, a narrative that could be spun and reshaped. She saw me as a tool she could use to repair her own life, the same way she'd once seen me as a tool to build it. "The person you're asking for, Helen," I said, my voice soft but unyielding, "he doesn't exist anymore. You and your family, you erased him. You called him unworthy. You threw him away because he didn't fit into your new life." I took a breath, the finality of my words settling in the quiet room. "You cannot ask the man you threw in the fire to come back and rescue you from the ashes." Tears streamed down her face. "So, what am I supposed to do?" "I don't know," I said, and it was the honest truth. "You need to build something for yourself. Something real. Something that doesn't depend on the approval of others." I walked to the door and held it open. It was the hardest and most necessary boundary I had ever drawn. She looked at me one last time, a flicker of the girl I once loved lost in the eyes of a woman I no longer knew. Then she turned and walked out into the night, leaving me alone in the quiet, solid house that was, finally and truly, my own. 3 months passed. The winter rains washed Port Blossom clean, and a fragile spring began to push its way through the damp soil. The scandal faded, as all scandals do, replaced by new headlines and fresh outrages. The Vances and the Wellingtons retreated into a wounded, self-imposed exile, their names now a local shorthand for hubris and hypocrisy. In the quiet cocoon of our home on the marsh, Maya and I thrived. The house felt lighter, breathing easily without the weight of pretense and unspoken resentments. My woodworking business flourished, built on a reputation not just for quality, but for character. I had more work than I could handle, from clients who valued the story behind the wood as much as the craftsmanship. Maya's art, too, had blossomed. Her sketchbooks filled with bold, confident lines. She had found her voice, not just in letters, but in her drawings of the wild, resilient beauty of the Low Country. One afternoon, I received a call from Maya's principal. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice warm. "We have our annual career day coming up. We try to showcase a wide variety of professions to the students. I was wondering, given the inspiration your story has provided to many in our community, if you would consider being one of our speakers." I was taken aback. "Me? I'm just a woodworker." "Exactly," she replied. "You build things that last. You stand for something. That's a career lesson I think our students desperately need to hear." A week later, I stood on the stage of the high school auditorium, feeling profoundly out of place. I wore my simple work clothes, clean jeans, a flannel shirt, and my worn leather boots. In the front row, I could see students in blazers, the children of doctors and lawyers, looking at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to faint disdain. Then Maya, who had been asked to introduce me, stepped up to the podium. Her voice, clear and steady, filled the auditorium. "Good morning," she began. "Today, we're going to hear from a lot of successful people. They will talk about their careers in law, in medicine, in business. And that's great. But I want to introduce you to a different kind of success." She turned and smiled at me. "This is my dad, Leo Vance. He's a furniture maker and a restorer. He doesn't have a fancy office or a corporate title. His hands are rough and his truck is old. By some people's standards, he might not seem elite." A small, knowing ripple went through the student body. "But let me tell you what he does," she continued, her voice ringing with pride. "He takes things that are broken and makes them whole again. He takes what is old and forgotten and finds the beauty in it. He builds things that are meant to be passed down through generations. He is the most honest, loyal, and hardworking man I've ever known. He taught me that the strongest foundations aren't built on money or status, but on integrity and love. He's my dad. And he's the most successful person I know." She walked over and hugged me. The auditorium was silent for a beat, and then it erupted in applause. It wasn't polite or obligatory. It was genuine, heartfelt. As I looked out at the sea of young faces, I saw their expressions had changed. The disdain was gone, replaced by a look of respect, and in some, even awe. My speech was simple. I didn't talk about revenge or family drama. I talked about the grain of wood. I talked about patience. I talked about the satisfaction of creating something real with your own two hands. I told them a person's worth is not in the title on their business card, but in the promises they keep to others and, more importantly, to themselves. Find your wood, find your grain. Build a life of character. That is a legacy no one can ever take from you. That evening, to celebrate, I took Maya to a small, unassuming waterfront cafe. We sat outside on the dock, watching the shrimp boats glide home in the fading light. The air was cool and salty, and the peace between us was deep and comfortable. Halfway through our meal, the owner of the cafe, a man I knew vaguely from the marina, came over to our table. He was holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Leo, Maya," he said with a warm smile. "I heard you speak today." My son was in the auditorium. He couldn't stop talking about it. He placed the bottle on our table. "This is on the house. To celebrate fathers and daughters, and things that are built to last." I was speechless. I looked at Maya, her eyes shining in the twilight, a small, proud smile on her lips. I thought back to the stinging rejection, the quiet humiliation, the cold fury that had threatened to consume me. It all felt like a story from another lifetime, about another man. I poured 2 glasses of champagne. I raised mine, the crystal clinking softly against hers. "To us," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And to finding our place." She met my gaze, her young face wise beyond her years. "You didn't just get even, Dad," she said softly. "You got whole." And in that moment, with the salt on the air and the love of my daughter beside me, surrounded not by the hollow echo of applause from strangers, but by the quiet hum of earned respect and unconditional love, I felt it. A wholeness I had never known. I was not a king in a castle or an elite in a ballroom. I was a man in a small boat, on a quiet tide, with my whole world sitting right across from me. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was the richest man in Port Blossom.